Welcome to another edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy. It's CFL Week 20. Ian Cameron with you. This will be a quick show. We're at the part of the year. We're down to the last 2 weeks of the CFL regular season. The playoffs will begin the first weekend of November, where it really is a spot-oriented betting philosophy. You're really tossing out, matchups, offense versus defense, X's and O's, matchups on the field. This is really about spots. This is about, teams that still have something to play for, teams that maybe are just playing for exercise, playing for the season to end. And there's certainly one team on the card this week that stands out in that regard. So that's where we're at. So it's definitely pick your spots at this time of year when it comes to betting these final couple weeks of the CFL regular season. Saskatchewan wrapped up the West last week. There's still, a battle between Montreal and Hamilton for first in the East. That being said, Hamilton's clearly in the driver's seat. All they need to do is win their final game, which is against Ottawa. So pretty good chance that happens, and Montreal would have to win out in order to take the division. But that is still up for grabs. And, of course, the biggest, battle going on in the CFL down the stretch is the battle for second in the West, and also who's going to get the crossover to the East and that final playoff spot in the West. BC, Calgary, and Edmonton are all battling for that. BC, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, I should say as well, battling for that. So it's like a 4-team battle in the West for 3 playoff spots. Someone's not going to get in, but BC, Calgary, Winnipeg, Edmonton, they are all still alive as far as the playoffs going into Week 20. We'll start with the team on a bye week, which happens to be my Hamilton Ticats, and just a dreadful performance against Calgary at home last week, a Stampeders team that was struggling going into that game last week, and all of a sudden, VA and the passing game gets rolling. Dedrick Mills with a very good game running the football. And then the Hamilton offense with Bo Levi Mitchell, the strength of the team, just not on track at any point, during that game last week. Struggled, couldn't get much mustard in the first half of that game. And, the more you look at Hamilton and you really do a deep dive on the 10 wins they've had this year, you find that there's so many wins that came against Toronto, Ottawa, Edmonton, lower tier teams. They did split with BC, but they beat Montreal twice when Davis Alexander was out, and they feasted on James Morgan and McLeod Bethel Thompson in those games. They beat one win against Winnipeg was when Chris Strevler played at quarterback for them. You know what I mean? 10 wins, but boy, oh boy, they faced either bad teams or, backup quarterbacks. And then you look at the way they played against, they played Zach Collaros, Winnipeg. They got bombed. They got swept 2 games by Calgary this year. Calgary sweeps them, goes 2-0. Saskatchewan swept Hamilton, going 2-0. The more you look at it, it's kind of a feasted on the week type of regular season for Hamilton. And they keep having opportunities to show that when they play a good team and or a team with their starting quarterback, they're not getting the job done in these spots. And I've said this all along about Hamilton. Yeah, they're probably going to win the East, and yes, they're probably going to get to host the East Division final. If it's against Montreal, I'd be scared. I'd be really, really terrified of that matchup if I'm the Ticats, especially if Davis Alexander has no more injury setbacks the rest of the way, because the Montreal Alouettes can easily come into Hamilton. And let's say Montreal gets second and they have to play one of the West crossover teams in the East semifinal, and let's say one of the West crossover teams beats Montreal, and it's the West crossover team heading to Hamilton for the East final. Any of those teams could probably beat Hamilton as well. There's real concerns. The defense just doesn't seem to be getting any better. You can run the football with great success against Hamilton. The run defense has been leaky. The pass rush is hit or miss. Secondary strong, but it's not like we saw them, we saw them struggle to, contain Calgary's receivers last week for a bit. So there's a lot of issues. I don't like the fact, again, that even though they're likely going to win the division, they have a 10-7 record. So much of it was against weak teams and our backup quarterbacks. When they've played good teams and the teams with their starting quarterback in there, that's where the Ticats have had issues. And it makes me think that, they're a team that's not as good as their record would suggest. And last week was an opportunity for them to say, you know what, here's Calgary. They're struggling. They're still a pretty good team, but they were struggling. They had lost 4 in a row going into that game. Here's our chance to show at home, we can step up and get the job done. And they fell flat. And they had a terrible game last week. Very concerning. Like I said, it's still been obviously a much better season than last year, but you have to remember so many of these wins have come against the weaker competition in this league. And as far as playoff success, just because you win the division, you're going to likely, doesn't automatically mean that in the playoffs you're going to have that success, because you're going to play great teams, and you're likely going to play teams with their number one quarterback. And Hamilton's going to have to definitely make some improvements. And we're at the stage of the season that, it's not easy to make massive improvements this late into a season. You are what you are. And that's certainly my concern that I have for my Ticats as the playoffs approach. All right, let's get into Week 20, and we will begin with Saskatchewan and Winnipeg. Friday night football tonight. We got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, 7-point home favorites, 48.5 the total. This is the first of the 2 games on Friday night. This opened Winnipeg minus 5.5, minus 6. It's gone up to 7.5 in some spots. I think Winnipeg's the play here. It's just, a simple handicap, very straightforward in my mind, with the Saskatchewan clinching the West Division last week and a bye to the West Final with their win against Toronto. They're resting Trevor Harris. Jake Mayer's going to start at quarterback. They've had some injuries in the secondary. It wouldn't shock me if Sales or Milligan or Campbell and some of these guys that have been banged up in the secondary for the Riders maybe sit in this game. They're playing out the string now. They've already locked up first in the West. Winnipeg is coming off, a bad performance against Edmonton. They're not going to be happy. Zach Collaros, had a couple of key turnovers. The defense, kind of struggled at times with Edmonton. They lose 25-20, so they weren't able to sustain the performance from the 2 wins before that against Ottawa and Hamilton. They'll be looking to bounce back here against a Saskatchewan team that has had Winnipeg's number this year. Saskatchewan 2-0 head-to-head versus Winnipeg. But that was back in August, September, the back-to-back rivalry games, the Labor Day Classic, and, of course, Labor Day weekend game, and, of course, the Banjo Bowl after that. And, of course, Saskatchewan, fully locked in. Now you're playing a Saskatchewan team that's dialed in and focused. They were then, but now there is some questions, having clinched first. Winnipeg, the last time they were at home, they crushed the Ticats 40-3. It's still a pretty strong home field. They haven't always been great in this home favorites role, and they do have to win by a touchdown or more, but it's lay it or don't play it for me here with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think the best approach, now that it's crossed 7 in some spots, I'm even seeing 7.5, that would be to take Winnipeg double result, which you can get at minus 140 at Bet365. That's a bet I like with a moderate favorite. That's just asking Winnipeg to win the first half and win the football game. That cashes the ticket with Winnipeg double result. So I would probably look at that here in this game. Like I said, I don't trust Jake Mayer on the road. And I know Winnipeg's defense has not been as good this year, but like I said, Jake Mayer's not a quarterback I fully trust. And we'll see if the Bombers defense can clamp down. Remember, they did hold a pretty good Hamilton offense to 3 points the last time they played here at Princess Auto Stadium. And I don't see Jake Mayer moving the football up and down the field against this Winnipeg defense on the road. All right, next up, Edmonton, BC. BC 6-point home favorites. And the total here, 56.5 in this one. This Edmonton Elks team, they just won't go away. And and they clearly have belief that they can still make the playoffs. It's not going to be easy. They have very little, if any, margin for error, have to win this game. But they have played with that resolve, like, we're going to do our damnedest to try to get in. And, with Cody Fajardo at quarterback, we've seen, obviously, this offense play well for extended periods. An offense that also has incorporated the run game a lot more to take some pressure off that offensive line and off Cody Fajardo. Justin Rankin has really established himself as a pretty solid CFL running back. So there's a lot of positives here for Edmonton. And you go back to the game where Cody Fajardo took over at quarterback. And this team, from an ATS standpoint, during that time, has been absolutely outstanding. 9-2 they are against the spread in their last 11 games. They've been a point spread covering machine. especially in the underdog role. Most of these games, they've been dogs. They're on a 5-0 ATS streak going into this game. The losses were a 1-point loss at Toronto, a 2-point loss at Hamilton, back-to-back home wins against Saskatchewan and Winnipeg. Defense has at least been a little bit better the last couple of games. That being said, that'll be put to the test here because, gosh, this BC offense, it has been impressive. We saw them obviously beat Calgary 38-24 before the bye week. And so great. Nathan Rourke and this Lions offense has been a machine. They're 9-1 to the over in their last 10 games, BC. And you look at the numbers they're putting up during this time. The last 10 games where they've gone 9-1 to the over, BC games have gone over 9 of the last 10 games. 27, 33, 41, 36, 34, 33, 38, 52, 27, 38. Like 27 is the fewest number of points they've scored, the BC Lions offense, during this last 10-game stretch. So there's no question they've been able to score points, move the football. I have to look over 56.5 here. I like Edmonton, though, and I don't always love it betting against, a BC team at home, rested off a bye, especially the way the offense was rolling. And I will say that this year they've dominated Edmonton in 2 games, 31-14 in June, 32-14 in July. I mean, 2 blowout wins by double digits for BC, but Edmonton was bad at that time. Trey Ford was still the quarterback at that time. They have not played Edmonton since Edmonton's put this late second half of the season push toward the playoffs on, and during this 9-2 ATS run. BC hasn't played Edmonton during this better version of the Elks that we have seen in the back half of the season. So I'm going to take the Edmonton side here, +6. I like the over here, 56.5 here in this game as well. All right, let's go to Saturday. We've got Montreal and Ottawa. Montreal Alouettes, 8.5, 9-point favorites here in this game, 51.5 the total. This is Montreal, either first half, point spread, which is -5.5, full game -9. You could take that. And I did take, now what I did was I did a split between first half -5.5 and full game -8.5 on Montreal in this game. And I also bet a separate Montreal double result. And again, that is a bet that you can find at Bet365. That's at -150. It's a little pricey, but I still got it at -150, Montreal double result, which is to win the first half and win the game. I think Ottawa's just a dead corpse walking on the football field right now. They've been terrible. Obviously they've shut down, Drew Brown's not playing, and now Dustin Crum is not playing, it looks like, in this game either. Tyree Adams is getting most of the practice reps this week for the Ottawa Red Blacks. So I'm not anticipating him having a great deal of success. Now, he can run a little bit, but it's kind of the same issue with him that you have with Dustin Crum. He's not a polished pocket passer. He just isn't. He struggles with accuracy, struggles with decision-making. He certainly has in the past when he started in the CFL for this Ottawa team. And this Ottawa team now 0-4 straight up, 0-4 against the spread their last 4 games, including the 30-10 blowout loss this past Monday on Canadian Thanksgiving in Montreal. Now, I know Montreal just beat this team by 20. You know what's scary for Ottawa about this game? You can make an argument Montreal didn't even play that good. Montreal didn't even play that well on Monday. Like Davis Alexander in the offense, that was not their A game. They kind of sputtered in the red zone, settled for field goals too much. That was not a crisp, clean, fluid performance from the Alouettes offense in Davis Alexander's second start back from injury. And yet they still won that game 30-10. They had the block punt early in the game, returned for a touchdown. That bolstered Montreal's cause. That's essentially what got them the point spread cover. Montreal did not play great against Ottawa, and yet they still won 30-10. Ottawa was lousy. Ottawa had very little offense to speak of, 10 points in that game. They now have gone 3 straight games without cracking 20 points, which speaks about how the issues that this team is having moving the football and finishing drives. Yeah, I'm laying it with Montreal here. First half, full game, Montreal double result, -150. I'm fine with all of those bets. To me, Ottawa, there's no chance I can possibly back them. This is a team that's out of the playoffs. They're not giving you great performance week in and week out. They're getting blown out now on a regular basis. Montreal's owned them this year. They blew out Ottawa back in this stadium, TD Place Stadium, earlier this year in week 2 with Davis Alexander at quarterback, 39-18 back in June in favor of Montreal over Ottawa here in Ottawa. Montreal's now covered 7 straight in the series. Montreal's 10-0 straight up, 9-1 against the spread the last 10 versus Ottawa. So they've dominated this series. With Davis Alexander starting against Ottawa, Montreal has won on the 2 games against Ottawa by a combined score of 69-28. 69-28, not even competitive. We're laying it with Montreal, and I like Montreal double result. And remember, Montreal's got to keep the foot on the gas pedal. They're trying to steal first place in the East from my Ticats, which they can still do if they win their remaining games and Hamilton somehow loses next, which would be just, you might as well forfeit the playoffs if you lose your home finale if you're Hamilton next week to this sad sack, lousy, dead as a doornail Ottawa team. But crazier things have happened. But yeah, for me, this is Montreal laying the points, Montreal double result. All right, our last game of this Week 20 CFL slate, Toronto and Calgary. We've got Calgary, 9.5 point home favorites, 52.5 the total in this game. This one's a little bit trickier. Calgary's got everything to play for. Toronto's already out. Toronto, we know, has shut down a lot of their players. Wynton McManus, he didn't play last week against Saskatchewan, yet still Toronto was right in that game and playing a Riders team with everything to play for. Saskatchewan was trying to clinch first in the West last week, and there's Toronto, 27-19 loss, cover the number as 10.5 point dogs. Even with Jarrett Dagey at quarterback, they found a way, to get inside the number. They have not rolled over this season. I'm seeing signs of quit. I'm seeing signs of Ottawa rolling over. I haven't seen that from Toronto. Toronto's still giving you a pretty good effort. They're competing for jobs now for next season. So it's going to, obviously they've shut down Nick Arbuckle. We're not going to see him again this season. Chad Kelly's not playing at any point this season. It looks like Wynton McManus is out once again. He hasn't practiced this week. DeMonte Coxey might be out. He hasn't practiced. Tavares Daniels. So there's a lot of injuries here for Toronto. That would be the concern. But even with all the injuries and the attrition, this team somehow finds ways to hang around. And so it's not the easiest decision to say, let's lay 9 here with Calgary in this game. Even though Calgary got off the schneid, snapped their 4-game losing streak with probably their best game in weeks on both sides of the football. The defense shut down Bo Levi Mitchell and the Ticats offense, and then Vernon Adams and Dedrick Mills leading the offense through the air, on the ground, 37-20 in favor of Calgary last week on the road against Hamilton, snapping that 4-game losing streak. Of course, Calgary's in that cluster, that big battle in the West, that cluster battle with BC, Winnipeg, and even Edmonton still in it, for playoff positioning, and also a potential West semifinal home game should they finish second in the West Division. So still lots to play for here for Calgary down the stretch. They are the much better team, but that's all accounted for. 9.5 point home favorite. We can't rule out the fact that Toronto is a road dog. I'm going back and I'm looking now. They've covered 3 in a row as a road dog. At Hamilton, they won outright as a road dog. At BC, 6.5 point dogs, they lost by 5. And then, of course, last week at Saskatchewan, 10.5 point dogs, they only lose by 8. So I don't know if I want to lay this many with Calgary in this spot, with Toronto, being as, competitive. And, it's still a try-hard team down the stretch here, even with the injuries and being out of the playoffs. And you got to give the Argos credit for that. So as of now, I may not move on this game. It could maybe talk me into a small over bet here, simply because Calgary's gone over in 4 straight games. Their offense, got right last week against Hamilton. They should be able to move the ball against Toronto's defense, which has been bad all year and may once again be without Wynton McManus this week. So Calgary should move the ball, but somehow, some way, Toronto, they get to 20, 23, 24. Most weeks, they've been able to still score points, the Argos. And that's even with Jarrett Dagey now at quarterback for them. Now, keep an eye on the quarterback spot. Jarrett Dagey is the number 1 guy for the remaining last couple games here, but I do know that they want to work in Tucker Horn, who is the other active quarterback on the Argos roster right now, and try to give him some reps here down the stretch. Will it be in this game? That remains to be seen. But that's something to keep in mind. We'll know more probably closer to kickoff on Saturday, but maybe a small over bet here, 52.5. Again, Calgary's gone over in 4 straight games. Nothing on the side. I mean, I think Calgary wins, but Toronto's been covering numbers like this on the road 3 consecutive times. They've been road underdogs in this kind of a price range. So that's probably enough to stay off the side in this one. All right, there you have it. That is week 20 in the CFL. Hope you enjoyed the show and the analysis. Again, we've only got one more week of CFL regular season football after this, and then we're on to the Grey Cup playoffs, the first Saturday of November. In fact, it's not only the first Saturday of November, it's the first day of November. Saturday, November 1st, will be the East and West Division semifinals. Saturday, November 8th, will be the East and West Division final. And then the Grey Cup will be Sunday, November 16th. And that will be the end of the CFL season. And by the way, the CFL Grey Cup, for anybody in the United States that watches and listens to the CFL edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy, the Grey Cup will be broadcast on CBS Sports Network in the United States this year. They came to a deal with the league to do the Grey Cup game, to have the Grey Cup game on CBS Sports Network. So good news for anyone wanting to watch the Grey Cup next month south of the border. All right, let's wrap it up with best bet. I'm going to go to Saskatchewan, Winnipeg. Let's go with Winnipeg double result, minus 140. I think they win the first half. I think they win the game. Saskatchewan's clinched the West. Resting Trevor Harris. Don't trust Jake Mayer. Bounce back spot for Winnipeg after losing on the road to Edmonton last week. Lots to play for still for the Bombers, trying to nail down second in the West and a home playoff game, the West semifinal. So I expect Winnipeg to show up and get it done. Winnipeg, double result, minus 140 for my best bet for CFL Week 20. That's a wrap. Shout out to everyone. Hit the like button on the way out. I'm Ian Cameron. Enjoy CFL Week 20, and good luck. And thanks for watching another CFL edition of Ian Cameron's Football Frenzy.